Be me, Linda, 34. Been married to Rowan for 8 years now. Finally have our bedroom situation exactly how it needs to be for optimal sleep hygiene and personal boundaries. Took years of patient education to get him to understand why structure matters. Every night at exactly 9:30 p.m, I announce bedtime. Rowan used to push back on this, but eventually learned that irregular sleep schedules are literally violence against your circadian rhythm. He sleeps on the left side because I need quick access to the bathroom due to my sensitive bladder. Room temperature stays at exactly 68 degrees because anything warmer triggers my night sweats and anything cooler affects my circulation. Blackout curtains, white noise machine, and amber lighting only after 8 p.m. These aren't rules. They're basic wellness practices that any educated person would understand. Rowan gets these weird looks sometimes when I explain our system. Like when I told his brother Marcus that Rowan isn't allowed in the bedroom after 7 p.m. on weeknights unless it's for sleep. I need that time for my meditation and skincare routine without masculine energy disrupting my space. Marcus made some comment about prison schedules, which shows his complete ignorance about intentional living. The bedding situation took months to perfect. Bamboo sheets because cotton is environmentally problematic and synthetic materials disrupt hormones. Memory foam pillow for me, regular pillow for him because his neck doesn't have the same alignment needs as mine. Separate blankets because his restless sleeping was affecting my RM cycles. Explain to Rowan that sleep divorce is actually a sign of emotional maturity and respect for individual needs. His sleeping position was the hardest thing to correct. He used to sprawl all over the place, sometimes even putting his arm over me during the night. Had to educate him about how unwanted touching, even unconscious, is a boundary violation. Now he sleeps properly on his side, facing away from me. Took weeks of waking him up whenever he moved wrong, but he eventually learned. Lately though, Rowan's been acting weird. Keeps making these passive-aggressive comments about feeling like a guest in his own house. I explained that homes aren't about ownership, but about creating safe spaces for everyone. Clearly, he doesn't understand that my needs aren't arbitrary. They're based on actual research about sleep science and personal autonomy. Last Tuesday he came home and just walked straight into the bedroom at 6 p.m. I was in the middle of my evening routine and had to firmly remind him about boundaries. Linda, I'm just getting my phone charger. Told him he could have asked me to get it, instead of barging into my sacred space. He got this look on his face, like he was going to say something but just walked away. Then, Friday night he didn't come to bed at 9:30. Found him in the living room, watching some documentary about mountain climbing. Explained that his screen time after 9 p.m. would affect both our sleep quality since we share a space. I'm sleeping on the couch tonight, he said. Obviously this was just him being dramatic to prove some kind of point. Saturday morning I woke up and he was still on the couch, made coffee and asked if he was done with his little protest. I'm not protesting anything, Linda. I'm just sleeping where I want to sleep. The way he said it was so dismissive, like my carefully constructed bedroom environment meant nothing to him. Spent the weekend trying to explain why consistency matters for both our well-being. He just kept saying, "Okay, Linda," in this flat voice that showed he wasn't really listening. Sunday night, I told him the couch sleeping needed to stop because it was disrupting our established rhythm. He looked at me and said, "What rhythm? You mean your rhythm?" Monday, he brought home a sleeping bag. A fucking sleeping bag. Set it up in the spare room that we use for storage. When I asked what he was doing, he said, solving the bedroom problem. There was no bedroom problem before he created one with his selfishness. Tuesday morning, I went to wake him up for his usual 6 a.m. start. The spare room was empty. Found him in the kitchen making breakfast, already dressed for work. Apparently he'd been up since 5 a.m. Rowan, you're going to throw off your entire circadian rhythm. Actually, I feel great. Slept better than I have in months. This went on for 2 weeks. Every attempt to discuss returning to our proper sleep schedule was met with this new attitude. He'd just smile and say, "I'm good, thanks." Like my expertise and our years of building healthy routines meant nothing. The worst part was how happy he seemed. Whistling in the mornings, staying up reading whatever he wanted, going to bed when he felt tired, completely abandoning everything we'd built together. When I pointed out that his selfish choices were affecting my sleep quality too, he suggested I might want to explore what works for me. Then last week, he did something that showed his complete disregard for our partnership. Bought a new mattress. Not for our bedroom, for his little spare room setup. Didn't consult me, didn't consider how this purchase affected our household budget discussion process. Just came home with a fucking mattress. When I confronted him about making major decisions without input, he said, "It's just a mattress, Linda." Just a mattress. Like sleep surfaces don't affect everything from spine alignment to relationship dynamics. Like I haven't spent years educating myself about these things, while he just does whatever feels good in the moment. I tried explaining that his rejection of our bedroom sharing was actually a rejection of intimacy and partnership. He was literally choosing individual comfort over our bond as a couple. His response was, maybe we have different ideas about what partnership looks like. The dismissiveness was unbelievable. Saturday morning I woke up and could hear him in his room talking to someone on the phone, laughing. Actually laughing at 7 a.m. like some kind of morning person. When I asked who he was talking to, he said his friend Jake about going hiking next weekend. Hiking. We'd never discussed hiking as something he was interested in. That's when it hit me how manipulative this whole thing was. He was using the sleep situation as an excuse to completely withdraw from our relationship, creating this false independence to avoid the emotional work of being a real partner. Probably been planning this passive-aggressive campaign for months. Sunday, I decided to be direct about what was really happening, sat him down and explained that his behavior was textbook emotional abandonment, that refusing to share a sleep space was creating artificial distance in our marriage, that healthy couples work through comfort issues together instead of just giving up. Rowan listened to everything I said. Then he asked, Linda, when was the last time you asked what I wanted? Obviously deflecting from the real issue. I told him that what matters isn't individual wants, but creating systems that work for both people. And do our systems work for both people? He asked. I explained that compromise means both people making adjustments, not just doing whatever feels good, that I'd spent years researching and implementing optimal sleep conditions for both our benefits, that his sudden rebellion was basically throwing away all that work. He just nodded and said, I hear you. Monday morning I woke up to find a note on the kitchen counter. Rowan had left early for work, but wanted to clarify his position. The note said he was grateful for everything I'd taught him about intentional living, and that he was going to start being more intentional about his own choices, starting with where and how he sleeps. When he got home that night, I was ready with articles about sleep divorce and its impact on marital satisfaction. Actual peer-reviewed research showing that couples who share sleep spaces have stronger emotional bonds. Scientific evidence that his choice was damaging our relationship foundation. He glanced at the printouts and said, interesting, but didn't engage with the actual data. Tuesday he rearranged the spare room completely, moved his desk in there, hung up some of his photos that had been in storage. When I pointed out that he was essentially creating a separate life space, he said, yeah, it feels good to have my own area. The selfishness was breathtaking. Acting like personal space was more important than shared space in a marriage. Wednesday I found him in there at 10 p.m. reading some book about wilderness survival, not even asking if I wanted to spend time together before bed, just assuming I was fine with him completely abandoning our evening routine. When I mentioned that couples who don't have bedtime routines together lose emotional intimacy, he said, maybe we can find other ways to connect. But here's the thing, we're not finding other ways. He's just happier without having to consider my needs, making his own schedule, controlling his own environment, doing whatever he wants, whenever he wants. It's like he's pretending he's not married. Thursday morning, he was up before 5 a.m. again. I could hear him moving around, making coffee, even doing some kind of exercise routine. When I asked about it later, he said he'd started doing push-ups and stretches in the morning. Never mentioned wanting to exercise before. Clearly, this is all part of his plan to become some kind of independent person who doesn't need partnership. Friday, I realized he'd been doing laundry separately. His clothes weren't in our usual sorting system. When I asked about it, he said he'd been doing smaller loads to stay on top of things. More evidence that he's systematically separating our shared responsibilities, trying to prove he can function without the systems we built together. Saturday morning was the breaking point. I woke up at 7 a.m. to the sound of him talking to someone outside. Looked out the window, and he was loading camping gear into his car. Camping gear that I'd never seen before. Apparently he'd bought supplies and planned an entire weekend trip without any discussion. Confronted him as he was finishing packing. Asked when exactly he'd decided that making major plans without spousal input was acceptable. He said, I mentioned it earlier this week, remember? The hiking thing with Jake? Mentioning something is not the same as having a real conversation about weekend plans. Told him that disappearing for entire weekends was abandonment behavior. That couples who want to stay connected make decisions together about how to spend their time. His response was, you're always welcome to do things you enjoy too, Linda. Like I was the one preventing myself from having experiences. He left Saturday morning at 6 a.m. I spent the weekend researching articles about midlife crisis and emotional affairs. Because this sudden need for independence and new experiences is classic avoidance behavior. Men who feel trapped in commitment often create false narratives about personal freedom. When he got home Sunday night, he looked disgustingly refreshed. tan from being outside, relaxed, talking about hiking trails and campfire conversations with Jake, acting like abandoning his wife for a weekend was some kind of accomplishment. I tried to explain how his choice affected me, but he just said, "I missed you too," and went to shower. Monday morning, I was ready with a real conversation about what was happening. Printed out information about emotional neglect in marriage and how gradual withdrawal destroys relationships. Explained that his recent behavior pattern was textbook avoidance of intimacy and commitment. He read everything I'd prepared and said, "This is a lot to think about." But thinking wasn't enough anymore. I needed him to acknowledge what he was doing and commit to rebuilding our shared routines. Told him that Tuesday night, we needed to start over with proper bedtime schedules and bedroom sharing. That his experiment in independence had gone on long enough. Tuesday night at 9:30, I went to his room to discuss the transition back to normal. Found him reading in bed, looking completely comfortable in his little setup. When I explained that it was time to return to healthy sleep sharing, he said, "I'm really happy with how I'm sleeping now." Happy. Like his individual happiness was more important than our relationship health. I explained that marriage means making sacrifices for your partner's well-being, that I'd been sleeping poorly for weeks because of his abandonment of our shared space. That real love means putting relationship needs above personal comfort. He said, "Linda, what if we both just slept however works best for us?" The suggestion was so completely selfish I couldn't even respond properly. He was basically asking permission to permanently destroy our bedroom intimacy, to officially choose his own comfort over our partnership. I told him that's not how marriage works, and left before saying something I'd regret. Wednesday, I decided to try positive reinforcement instead of confrontation. Made his favorite dinner, set the table nicely, lit candles. Wanted to remind him of what we could have if he'd just stopped this independence nonsense. During dinner, I brought up some couples therapy articles about rebuilding intimacy. Rowan was polite about everything, but kept steering the conversation toward general topics. Asking about my work, talking about news, avoiding the real issues. When I directly asked if he missed sleeping next to me, he said, "I miss a lot of things about how we used to be." Past tense, like our marriage was already over in his mind. Thursday, I found him researching weekend trips online, not family trips or romantic getaways, solo camping and hiking adventures. When I asked about it, he said he was thinking of doing more outdoor activities. I pointed out that excluding your spouse from new interests is relationship sabotage. He said I was always welcome to join, but we both knew outdoor stuff isn't my thing. Friday morning, he left work early, texted me that he was going for a long drive and would be back Sunday. A long drive. Just disappearing for 3 days without any real planning or discussion. When I called to ask where he was going, he said, "Just exploring. I'll keep you posted." I spent Friday evening researching divorce statistics, because that's where this was obviously heading, his systematic withdrawal from every aspect of our shared life. The way he'd created complete independence from all our established routines. Textbook preparation for leaving the relationship. Saturday, I called my sister Rebecca to process what was happening. Explained how Rowan had basically moved out of our bedroom and was acting like a bachelor. How he'd abandoned years of careful relationship building for selfish comfort. Rebecca listened, but then said something that showed she doesn't understand relationship dynamics. "Maybe he just needed some space, Linda. Has he seemed happier?" Happier. Like individual happiness is the goal of marriage. I explained that Rowan's happiness was coming at the expense of our bond as a couple. That real satisfaction comes from building something together, not from avoiding compromise. Rebecca suggested maybe we could both benefit from some individual space. Clearly, she's never put the work into maintaining a serious partnership. Sunday evening, Rowan came back looking even more disgustingly content. Talking about some small town he'd discovered, and a conversation with a local artist about metalworking. Metalworking. Suddenly interested in crafts he'd never mentioned in 8 years of marriage. I asked if he was having some kind of identity crisis, and he laughed. Actually laughed. At a serious question about his mental health and our relationship stability, told me he felt more like himself than he had in years, which was basically an insult to everything we'd built together, like being married to me had somehow prevented him from being authentic. Monday morning, I presented him with a clear choice. Either commit to rebuilding our bedroom sharing and evening routines by Wednesday, or admit that he was choosing individual comfort over our marriage. No more pretending this was about sleep preferences. Time to be honest about what was really happening. Rowan listened to my ultimatum and said, "Linda, what if neither of those is what's actually happening?" Deflecting again, I explained that actions speak louder than words, and his actions showed complete disregard for our partnership. He said, "What actions would show regard for our partnership?" The question was obviously meant to trap me. make me sound controlling for wanting basic relationship standards. I told him that partners who care about each other make decisions together, share space, maintain routines, prioritize connection over individual preference. He nodded and said, I want to prioritize connection too. But his version of connection apparently meant doing whatever he wanted while expecting me to be happy about it. Tuesday night, he made dinner and suggested we eat outside on the patio, like changing the location would distract from his continued refusal to address the real issues. I tried steering conversation toward our bedroom situation, but he kept talking about the weather. Wednesday was the deadline I'd given him, 9:30 p.m. I went to his room expecting either a conversation about returning to normal or an honest admission that he'd given up on our marriage. Instead, I found the room empty. He was in the backyard staring at the sky. When I asked what he was doing, he said, looking at stars. Apparently he'd been going outside after I went to bed for weeks, just standing around thinking instead of working on our relationship problems. I pointed out that avoiding your wife by hiding in the yard is not healthy coping. He said, I'm not hiding, I'm just enjoying the quiet. That's when I finally understood what was really happening. Rowan hadn't just abandoned our bedroom routines, he'd emotionally abandoned our entire marriage, chosen to be completely selfish and independent rather than do the work of partnership, and somehow convinced himself this was healthy instead of destructive. Thursday morning, I woke up furious. Absolutely furious that he'd manipulated the situation to make his selfishness look like personal growth, that he was getting to be happy and free while I dealt with the consequences of his choices, that he'd destroyed years of careful relationship building and was acting like it was liberation, confronted him before he left for work, told him exactly what I thought about his fake independence and abandonment behavior, how his refusal to share space and maintain routines was emotional cruelty, how his sudden interest in solo activities was obviously preparation for ending our marriage. Rowan listened to everything I said. Then he said, Linda, I'm not preparing to end our marriage. I'm trying to figure out how to stay in it, like I was the problem. Like years of my effort to create optimal living conditions had somehow made him want to leave. I demanded he explain what that meant. He said, I spent so many years trying to be the husband you wanted that I forgot how to be myself. More deflection and blame. I told him that growth in marriage means becoming better versions of ourselves, not abandoning compromise. What if compromise isn't the same as control? He asked. The audacity, suggesting that my research-based approach to shared living was somehow controlling. I explained that structure isn't control, it's care. That I'd invested years in learning how to optimize our shared spaces for both our well-being. Friday, he didn't come home until after 10 p.m. Found him in his room, reading again. When I asked where he'd been, he said he'd gone to dinner with some co-workers. Dinner with co-workers on a Friday night without checking if I had plans. I pointed out that married people generally coordinate evening schedules. He said, You're right, I should have mentioned it earlier. Mentioned it, not asked permission or discussed it. Just mentioned it like my opinion didn't matter. I told him that his casual attitude toward our shared time was relationship sabotage. He said, What would be a better way to handle it? Another trap question, designed to make me sound unreasonable for wanting basic consideration. I explained that couples who respect each other have conversations about plans, not announcements. He said, Okay, let's have more conversations. But his tone was so patronizing, like he was humoring me. Saturday morning I woke up to find another note. Rowan had left early to go hiking with Jake again. The note said he'd be back Sunday evening and hoped I had a good weekend. Hoped I had a good weekend, like his absence was a gift instead of abandonment. I spent Saturday researching lawyers, because this pattern was clearly leading to divorce. His systematic creation of independence, the emotional withdrawal, the way he'd stopped engaging with relationship maintenance, all classic signs of someone preparing to leave. Sunday evening, he came back with stories about the hiking trail and some wildlife they'd seen, acting like his weekend abandonment was just innocent fun. I asked him directly if he was planning to leave our marriage. He said, Linda, I'm trying to stay, but I need to stay as myself, not as who you think I should be. More blame and deflection. I told him that marriage means being willing to grow and change for your partner's well-being, that I'd never asked him to be someone else, just to be considerate of shared space and routines. He said, What does consideration look like to you? I explained that consideration means prioritizing our relationship over individual comfort, sharing space even when it's not your preference, maintaining routines that work for both people, making decisions together instead of just doing whatever you want. He listened and said, I understand that's what you need, but understanding and doing are different things. Monday through Wednesday, he continued his pattern of separate sleeping, separate routines, separate activities. acting like a bachelor who happened to live with me. When I pointed out that nothing had changed despite our conversation, he said, "I'm still figuring out how to balance things." Thursday, I reached my breaking point. Told him that either he committed to rebuilding our shared routines by this weekend, or I was done. No more fake compromises or empty promises. Time to choose between his selfish independence and our marriage. Rowan looked at me for a long moment and said, "Linda, what if the choice isn't between independence and marriage? What if it's between control and partnership?" The manipulation was unbelievable, twisting my years of care and effort into some kind of controlling behavior. I told him that wanting your husband to share your bed isn't control, it's basic relationship expectations. "What about what I want?" he asked. What about what he wants? Like his individual preferences matter more than our partnership. I explained that mature adults sometimes do things they don't prefer because they love their spouse. He said, "I do love you, Linda, but I also need to love myself." Saturday morning was the final straw. I woke up and Rowan was already gone. Another note saying he'd gone camping again and would be back Monday. Monday, disappearing for 3 entire days without any real discussion or consideration. I spent the weekend absolutely enraged at his complete disregard for our marriage, at the way he'd systematically destroyed every routine and boundary we'd established, at his fake happiness and independence that was really just selfishness and avoidance. When he came back Monday evening looking refreshed and content, I completely lost it. Told him exactly what I thought about his behavior. How his choices had made me miserable while he got to be free and happy. How unfair it was that he got to abandon responsibility while I dealt with the consequences. Rowan listened to everything and then said, "Linda, I want you to be happy too. What would make you happy?" Like it was my fault for not finding my own selfish independence. I told him that I'd be happy if he stopped abandoning our marriage for fake personal growth. He said, "What if we both focused on what actually makes us happy instead of what we think should make us happy?" The conversation was pointless. He'd already made his choice to prioritize himself over our partnership, to be completely free and independent while destroying everything we'd built together. And somehow, he'd convinced himself this was healthy instead of selfish. Tuesday morning, I told him I was considering separation, that his emotional abandonment had made our marriage unsustainable, that I couldn't continue being the only person invested in maintaining our relationship. He said, maybe separation would give us both space to figure out what we actually want. Space to figure out what we want. Like 8 years of marriage hadn't already shown us what partnership looks like the problem was confusion instead of his refusal to compromise. I realized then that he'd already emotionally divorced me. All this fake independence and happiness was just him preparing for the end. Now he's completely free, sleeping wherever he wants, doing whatever he wants, going wherever he wants, acting like a single person while I deal with the reality of our failing marriage. And somehow, I'm the one who's unreasonable for wanting basic partnership standards. He destroyed everything we built together for his own comfort, abandoned years of careful routine and consideration for selfish independence. And now he's happier than he's ever been while our marriage falls apart. The manipulation and selfishness is absolutely unbelievable.